Yeah, we'll do it live. Just, we'll do it live. Happy Halloween. Well, in 4 more days. I have been mulling over the case of Michael Brown ever since Sunday, August 10th, which was the day after he was shot and killed by Officer Darren Wilson. I am filming this, and this is my first filmed comment on this case, by the way. Anyway, I'm filming this as whisperings are just starting to get more unified and more distinct that Officer Wilson will not be brought up on charges. Grand jury at the moment in the penultimate stages, as it were, of deciding in which direction they will proceed. By the way, I feel Wilson should be indicted. No, hold on a second. But that's a qualified indictment, not the normal kind of indictment that you might be thinking of, and of which I'll explain fully here in a minute or two. In the rest of this video, I show how what happened to Brown was a lot closer to a planned murder than what most Americans are comfortable admitting. By the way, here's a big smooch, a kissing goodbye to all the mentally deficient folks. Bye. I know you got tired of learning a long time ago, so you're gone. Have fun being other-abled. Have fun being developmentally disabled up in this area of the world. Thanks for lasting as long as you did. For what it's worth, I've been studying this case via a variety of sources for over 2 months now, and I learned how to critically analyze the kinds of variables present in this case at the University of Oregon, where I got my bachelor's degree in criminology. Anyway, the problem is that if Wilson is legitimately, seriously charged with anything too harsh, like murder, he won't be found guilty. On the other hand, if he's charged with anything too lenient, like reckless endangerment or illegally discharging a firearm or whatever, well, then we're still going to get riots. I suggest two solutions, or rather, two parts or two halves of one solution. In other words, I suggest we the people do both of the following. The first half is use this Mike Brown historical event to get the process going where we change the rules of engagement or protocol for such civilian-cop interactions. Change the protocol so that it's much easier for cops to tase. It's easier, even encouraged, for police officers to beat with batons with impunity. Much easier, and again, much encouraged for them to shoot beanbags and rubber bullets and to spray mace and pepper and tear gas, etc., etc., etc. Any and all of that non-lethal stuff, but that if law enforcement officials even pull their regular bullet-shooting guns, then they're looking at tons and tons of paperwork, weeks, maybe months of official forms to fill out and hoops to jump through. Almost assuredly, they're going to get fired, probably going to be riding a desk for 5+ years if they're not fired, and yeah, they're going to get a pay cut. And the second part of my solution is to charge Wilson with a type of homicide where the punishment is that he'll likely spend more than 10 years behind bars, and blast that info early and often in all the media, cast it broadly, if you will, but then convict him of something where he's supposedly going to be in prison and in protective custody for about 5 years. That way, we avoid the rioting. Then give him a facelift, transfer him from prison to prison to prison, and then another transfer. Keep on transferring him until everybody's lost track of him, which should take maybe a year, and then put him, with his new face and his family, into the witness protection program in Florida or Alaska or, far away from Missouri. So it's one country club party after another for Wilson for that first year. And then after that, he starts his new life of never being a cop again. I say all of this because there's no way he's going to get legitimately convicted of some form of homicide. What unfolded was $1 billion, with a B, $1 billion in property damage after the first Rodney King verdict was read 20 years ago, which now would be at least a couple $1 billion, corrected for inflation. $2 billion in property damage? Do we need that? And then another trial of those Rodney King beating officers, trying and convicting them on civil rights charges. Why not avoid the charade? Why not avoid the riots? Give the people what they want now and save a bundle. Also, here's another possible fly in that ointment. One of these times, people are going to jump up and down about a second bite of that apple, about our right to not be tried twice for the same crime, a la the Fifth Amendment to our Constitution. And these people will jump, and we the people, we might not get that second bite. We might not get that civil rights trial. That's why I say, let's leapfrog right to the civil rights trial right now. Skip past the dog and pony show of a first trial. And I realize dog and pony is probably not the most accurate cliche, but whatever. Anyway, here's where the rubber hits the road. What I plan to do today is to describe to you, the viewer, what I conceive to be the most likely sequence of events that occurred on August 9th in Ferguson, Missouri. Also, I have two personal, real-world experiences that intimately relate to this case, which absolutely must be delved into post-haste. 1, I have personally been grabbed by the throat by a former Marine. He grabbed my larynx, or Adam's apple, tightly with his fingertips and thumb, like this. Right there. Not quite choking me, but squeezing very hard. I remember feeling his fingernails digging into my skin. I felt as though if I struck up or down or tried to back away from him or did anything at all really other than completely go limp from about here up, I mean, I couldn't just fall down. My throat would have been ripped. So I'd go limp from here up, and just whichever way that hand wanted to move me is the way I was going to move. I felt as though if I struck his arm up or down or tried to back away from him or did anything at all really other than go completely limp, that any physical motions that I would have done would have resulted in my throat being ripped and my suddenly finding it very difficult to breathe. At the time, I was a clerk at a tiny store in a tiny town, and I didn't have a gun, and I didn't have a running vehicle with me, no relatives nearby, and I had just moved there off in the boonies for that job. It was to be a summer job, saving up for the next school year, and I didn't know what kind of clout this physically fit 30-year-old gentleman had in our little town. So I hoped he'd let go, and after about 4 or 5 seconds, he did. I imagined someone else being gripped by the Adam's apple and being pulled into a squad car and not being able to breathe. I imagined someone in similar straits to the straits I had been in would perhaps push forward so as to gain some leverage or just do something to breathe. I'm not sure how to stop someone from choking me to death or choking me into unconsciousness in such a situation. Officer Wilson is trained in such hand-to-hand combat, and Dorian Johnson, the man who was walking with Mike Brown when this scuffle took place, Dorian Johnson testified that he saw Wilson grab Brown by the neck. To expect someone to not panic, to expect someone to not panic when grabbed in such a manner by the throat is really expecting a lot, don't you think? And 2, or my second real-world experience, a friend of my ex just happens to be a police officer here in Arkansas. This police officer told me that new or would-be cops also practice unholstering their guns often, or until the 3-step method for unholstering it becomes like second nature. And yes, there is a 3-step process for removing a cop's gun from its holster. It's a 3-step method that I know about, that I know of, but I was not told, and I do not know, what these 3 steps are. I was told that these 3 steps exist, but but I was not told anything specific about them other than it takes the average trainee cop a bit of practice to be able to accomplish this three-step gun unholstering maneuver with the kind of speed necessary to pass that part of the cop exam. Cops do have their secrets that they don't just blab about. Can I get an amen? If no amen yet, then check out my description box down there. I link to an article that mentions the holsters that cops use, and they are called triple retention holsters, quote unquote. The use of the term retention here is used in a somewhat Orwellian fashion, in my opinion, again, to hide the secret of how to unholster a cop's gun from those who aren't cops. The reason why our police officers have such a secret and such a time-consuming procedure is precisely so that perps or so-called bad guys can't come along and grab a cop's gun away from him or her. At some point during his interactions with Mike Brown, or right before he began interacting with Brown, Officer Wilson had to have gone through this three-step process of unholstering his sidearm, which is time-consuming, and Wilson also had to aim, which is also time-consuming. Anyway, here's the timeline, and I will skip right to the one critical juncture that could turn this case, and no one has mentioned a thing about it. After passing Brown and Johnson on Canfield Drive, and then after parking his SUV Prowler crosswise in front of these pedestrians so as to block them, and before he attempted to open his door, is when Officer Wilson must have gone through the three-step process of unholstering his gun. It's likely that he unholstered his service revolver when he was maneuvering around Brown and Johnson, or right after he parked in front of them, but it's also possible that he had unholstered his revolver minutes before encountering them, and that he just kept it there next to him on the seat, unholstered. My point is this: that gun had to have been unholstered before the physical struggle with Mike Brown began, which I aim to prove in the remainder of this video. Concerning the above and the following conjecture, and I admit it's conjecture, and that the only way for this kind of evidence to ever be admissible in court would be for Officer Wilson himself, while sitting in the witness chair, to recall in court or while conversing with the grand jury what he was thinking and doing while he was thinking and doing it on the day of the shooting. Though conjecture is frowned upon in our courts of law, conjecture often is bandied about in the court of public opinion. And then once in a while we'll notice that reverberations of public opinion conjecturing have wound up inside of our courtrooms. Which doesn't sound like blind justice, but it's what we have to live with. Anyway, I have both a major and a minor point to make, and they contain some conjecture, which I think of conjecture as being an idea that may or may not be provable. Just an idea, just a hunch. First, my minor point, and I'm not basing my whole case on this perhaps trivial point. I'm just saying that this minor point may buttress, it may help my entire case, but it also may easily be shot down. Go ahead and shoot it down, my YouTube viewer, but hear me out too, which is to say, listen to my major point before you start railing against me. And no, I do not base my major point on my minor point at all. They are completely separate. Anyway, here's my minor point. A pedestrian is not very likely to be reaching into your cop car and then reaching past you and then reaching down to about where your right hip is while you, a cop, are sitting in the driver's seat, sitting up pretty high, by the way. Remember, this was an SUV that Wilson was driving. Height of these cop SUVs range from 75 to 77 inches. And then even in the unlikely case that that 76-inch pedestrian, Brown was 76 inches tall, somehow is able to reach your gun in its holster, he's still not going to be able to figure out how to unholster your weapon that is located approximately on your right hip. The answer is simple. If you don't want a pedestrian to shoot you with your own gun, just keep it holstered. In the situation that unfolded in Ferguson, here's what should have been the obvious steps to take if your intent was to avoid murdering people, if at all possible. Keep your cop doors locked, roll down your bulletproof window a couple inches, and then state your business with that pedestrian. If at that point you, the cop, realize that that pedestrian is also a perp, then you have plenty of time to unholster your weapon and to move on to steps 2, 3, 4, etc. Here's my major point. I think when Wilson unholstered his gun has a huge bearing on this case. Now, it's going to take some doing. It's going to take a while to unpack what I have to unpack. And here I'm talking about why, when Wilson unholstered his gun, is so important. And I have some proofs as to when I think this when happened. Got a window of time, no less. And I have some speculations, or some conjecture, if you will, where the step-by-step logic of how the situation unfolded points to intent. What I'm about to do can be visualized with the following analogy. You happen upon someone in the woods who's shivering, and it's 35 degrees Fahrenheit, just barely above freezing, and it's daytime and dry, and this person is wearing a t-shirt and shorts, no shoes, no socks, and no hat. This person is gathering sticks and twigs, and it's your job to guess what this person's next move is. And then you notice this person placing his or her armful of twigs and branches into a fire pit. Again, it's time to guess. And you win millions of dollars if you guess correctly what this person's next move is. And then you will see this person pull some matches out of a pocket. Again, it's time to speculate. It's time to conjecture and maybe win a prize. Go ahead. Guess what's about to happen next. And the winning answers are build a fire, or make a fire, or this person is going to make a fire. All winners. It's not a hard test, folks. Oh, here comes a conflagration. Is also a winning answer. Flames are about to start licking around those twigs. Jeopardy music for 2 seconds, followed by ding, 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 ding. Yep, that's even a correct answer. I see a blaze on the horizon? Correct. Also a winning answer. I think Wilson was doing the equivalent of collecting twigs and reaching for matches. Yes, it takes stepping out on a limb to say the word fire right about now. Yes, it takes some speculating or some conjecturing to utter the prediction he's trying to start a fire, based on noticing someone collecting logs and flicking his bick. But I feel confident that my major assertion or accusation associated with when Wilson unholstered his weapon points very logically to his intent. As this will take a while to unpack, I'm suggesting that you, the viewer, refill your coffee cup at this point, or go pop some corn, take a leak, whatever. This will be lengthy. Pause the video now. Or not. Okay, here goes. Quote, there just wasn't enough time for it to happen then. It had to have happened earlier, end quote. And I'm just quoting myself. Now I'm going to say this quote 2 more times, and by the 3rd time I say it, everything should be locked into place. There had to have been continuous action. After parking crosswise, Wilson opened his door rather vigorously enough so that it then bounced off of either Brown or Brown and Johnson, and then it had enough momentum after that bounce to close again, followed immediately by Officer Wilson's arm extending out of his SUV cop car, and Wilson grabbing onto Brown's throat or larynx or Adam's apple or windpipe, followed immediately by Wilson attempting to help Brown board his vehicle through his open window. Brown, feeling his windpipe being squeezed, followed by the hand pulling him into Wilson's squad car. Speculation. If Brown had thought of putting his hands on the outside of Wilson's SUV in an attempt to brace himself, and or in an attempt to stop his ingress into Wilson's vehicle, he chose not to do so. And I'm speculating here from my own experience of having my Adam's apple squeezed in a similar manner. And I'm speculating that in order to prevent my Adam's apple or larynx from being crushed when it was happening to me, I would have followed the squeezing hand too, if that squeezing hand seemed to be moving in a given direction. This is why I think that at first Brown was surrendering, while he let that gripping hand pull him and his windpipe further into Wilson's SUV, but that then Brown saw a gun being pointed at him and he panicked and swatted at that gun, not in an attempt to take the gun from Wilson, but in an attempt to stop it from being pointed at him. This is why Brown's hand was grazed by a bullet at close range, and the autopsies do confirm that Brown's hand was struck by a bullet from a very close proximity. Immediately after firing a shot or two from inside his vehicle, Wilson's grip loosened on Brown's neck, and that's when Brown broke away and began running up the street. Either that, or after hearing and feeling a shot being fired, perhaps Brown just figured that he had more important issues to worry about than his windpipe being squeezed shut or squeezed into disrepair, and so he broke away from Wilson's grip, more worried about Wilson's gun's bullets than about the health of his neck. Like maybe Brown figured he was being fired on anyway, why keep surrendering? It would be nice if one of the 3 autopsies examined the skin around Brown's Adam's apple for possible scratching administered by fingernails. Quote, there just wasn't enough time for it to happen then. It had to have happened earlier. End quote. As you may have gathered from the previous paragraph, I think it's easy to envision that there had to have been continuous action from the moment that Wilson slammed his car door into Brown. From that moment going forward, there had to have been continuous high-stress action similar to a flurry of punches thrown in a boxing match. There wasn't time enough to be one-handing this bad guy's throat and proceeding through the 3-step method of unholstering his weapon, then aiming. And all of that happening before Wilson shot Brown. There wasn't enough time. Yeah, sometimes I've seen cops do things that made me think that they were superheroes. But that's superheroes. That's not supernatural. No matter how heroic, cops still can't perform supernatural feats. They're human, just like you and just like me. Okay, so we got humans, and we got humans involved in a stressful situation. I see this as a high-emotion, high-stress encounter as evidenced by a 4,000-plus pound vehicle almost colliding with pedestrians, and then words are spoken to the effect of getting the F out of the street, quote-unquote, and that F word rhymed with Chuck, by the way, which is proof that these were high-stress moments, or proof enough, followed by a car door being opened rather violently, and for the purposes of violence, and for the purpose to inflict pain, if I may opine. And then right there, from that point forward, I ask you, the viewer, if it seems likely that even a well-trained officer would be able to reach through his open window, grab onto the neck of a 6'4", 292-pound man, 18-year-old man, and then begin to pull this man by his throat into his vehicle, all the while, and here's the tricky part, doing all of that while going through the 3-step maneuver to unholster his gun. One hand in the perp, by the throat, and going bippity-boppity-bippity, 1, 2, 3, on his gun in his holster, on his right hip, while he's working this way. He's working this way and probably just reaching just about straight across out his window if you do the inches and the math and everything. Probably just reaching about straight across, pulling this way. Now what's this hand doing? Oh, the bippity-boppity-bip, the 3-step. The powers of concentration required to do all of that simultaneously. I mean, all of that stress and high anxiety to just calmly do the bip-bop-bip at your holster, get out your gun, aim. I just don't see it. The only reason a cop would be one-handing somebody in a situation like that is because he's already aiming. And the cop knows that just the second a given barrier is breached, just the second that that perp or citizen throws a punch, or even so much as slaps at the hand that is choking him or her to death, for all he or she knows, well, that's right when the rules of engagement allow that officer to shoot. While having your air cut off, and while someone is forcefully pulling at your windpipe, pulling you by your windpipe further and further into his vehicle, this seems like a good time to panic. And based on how a given citizen or perp panics, an officer may or may not feel led to shoot. Resisting arrest under such conditions would seem to be very easily confused with simply panicking because you can't breathe. I think it should be obvious that after that door got slammed, that Officer Wilson began greasing the rails that would lead to circumstances where he could legally shoot Brown and get away with it. Yes, there were various moments throughout this incident where Brown could have hit the ground and remained motionless, and he still might be with us today. But isn't it interesting that after a few bonehead moves that still wouldn't garner the death penalty, might get you a month behind bars is all, but anyway, isn't it interesting that after a few stupid 18-year-old person's mistakes, that Brown finally did figure out that if he just laid down with his hands up, that all the bad things would stop happening, which gained him 2 more bullets in the head. Which reminds me, before I get to my final movement, which is to say before I spell out what I mean when I say it had to have happened earlier, let me say one thing about why cops were invented. The reality is, I have really big balls. And when I'm driving on the sidewalk, the people I run over get run over for a reason. Because their balls aren't as big as mine are. Mike Brown had really big round things down there. We know this by where he walked. Right down Broadway. Right down the middle of the road. I think cops were invented for a reason. Cops happen along to situations like this, and they say to the Mike Browns of this world things like, I know it. I'm there, dude. I'm with you. I know you have really gigantic round things down there, but it's time for you to take you and your magnificent round mounds of glory and march them on over to the sidewalk. And after you get on that sidewalk, watch out for Terrico. I heard he's in the neighborhood. Okay, all kidding aside, there needs to be a way to motivate pedestrians to not walk down the middle of the street for extended periods of time unless they're involved in a parade. I wish the rules of engagement were different so that Officer Wilson could have persuaded Brown to get on the effing sidewalk, and so that Brown would still be alive today, and so that a car motoring through that neighborhood would not have to worry about pedestrians walking down the middle of the street. There needs to be a way to keep the peds on the sidewalks and keep the cars off the sidewalks. I have looked at the Google Maps for this specific stretch of road, and there are nice sidewalks on both sides of that section of Canfield Street, and there was not a street corner very close to where the conflicts took place. So it's not like they were only going to walk another foot or 2 or even 10 or 20 feet down the middle of the street and then hit the street corner. No, not at all like that. It was time for those fellas to hit the sidewalk. It really was. Go look at Google Maps, you'll see. Anyway, here's the finale. Wilson had to have his gun already pulled out of its holster before he slammed his car door into either Brown or into Brown and Johnson. Then Wilson clamped his hand around the windpipe of Brown sending Brown into a panic situation, all the while pointing his service revolver at Brown and waiting for a chance to shoot him, with the intent being to shoot him if given a chance. Expecting a person to not panic in a situation like that is expecting too much. Hoping that this person panics in the "you get to shoot him and get away with it" kind of way is sickening. We the people have to try this man in court. But no matter how many months or years Wilson spends behind bars, it's still not going to bring back Brown. Therefore, I propose it's much more important to change the rules of engagement for situations like these. The protocol regarding when and under what circumstances cops are allowed to use lethal force need to be changed. Shootings like this should be much, much more rare. These kinds of police shootings don't happen nearly as often in other countries. And these other countries have plenty of guns. Look at Canada. Canada has as many guns per person as we do here in the States, but they don't have nearly as many of these kinds of killings. Percentages, they don't have that either. Oh, happy Halloween.